Okay, wonderful. So, yeah, thanks again for joining us. We're going to be looking today at record forms, principally in GoodCRM. Record forms are incredibly flexible. We're also going to be looking at connection fields in those record forms and looking generally at how useful connections are within the system. I'm going to be using some examples which are probably fairly general. Some of them are fundraising type examples, but they can be applied to lots of different things as well. So without further ado, I'm going to get started. There will be a question and answer session at the end of today's session. So do feel free to put some questions into the chat, and Steph will be looking out for those as we go through. Okay, so as I said, we're going to be looking at record forms today. So I'm going to start off with a simple question. What are record forms? And record forms basically allow you to store all sorts of different types of data within the system. And essentially, if you're storing data that isn't a person, it's not an organization, an event, or so on, then it can live in a record form. Examples would be things like press clippings, workforce monitoring, feedback. We're also going to be looking at some fundraising examples today, and things like open calls and that kind of thing. Record forms are fairly unique in GoodCRM in that they can be shared or embedded. So you can have external stakeholders fill these forms in. You can embed the forms into your own web page. We can do that with other types of forms, but only as part of a workflow, which is bespoke work. Whereas with record forms, these can be shared, again, just to collect information from external people that don't have access to your CRM. And records or responses in record forms can be connected to anything else in the CRM as well via connection fields. And I expect most of the people on the call today have certainly done the basic training or have at least had some basic experience with using forms and fields in the system. So when I'm going through some of the examples today, I'm not going to be going into all the minutiae about how we edit forms and add fields. Hopefully you're all familiar with that to some degree. If you haven't been on to the training yet, do go over to goodcrm.co.uk/book to book onto our training sessions. They do run typically every fortnight. Okay, so that's record forms. I'm going to talk about connections as well. So I've mentioned that this is going to be looking at connection fields, and anyone that's been on the training recently or who has been in a demo recently will have seen this slide just to explain what these connection fields are all about. And they're very much about connecting data together within the CRM, defining relationships in the data. And so we use the example of a project, and a project maybe has some funders and some partners that you're working with. So funding organizations, partner organizations. So we can create connection fields in the system, custom fields of type connection, one called funders, one called partners, and we can connect these organizations to our projects using those fields. A project maybe has some events, some workshops. Those workshops maybe have some participants and a session leader. And so connections allow us to join all these things together. And that means that not only can I find out who's leading tomorrow's session, but also I can get the demographic breakdown of all of the participants who've participated in the last year in projects that were funded by the Arts Council, because we've got all of this connectivity. So we can do that through our segments. So that's just a little bit of background to record forms and connections, which we're going to be looking at today. Okay, so time for Tom's top tip, number one. So yeah, I'm going to be looking at a few top tips, and I will send across with the video as well. I'll send across the slides from today's meeting, which have all these tips in there. And the first tip that I'm going to look at when it comes to using record forms in GoodCRM is to use the name field in your record form. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that, and I'm going to explain why. So tip number one is use the name field. So I'm going to go ahead and share another screen, and we're going to go ahead and build a record form. So record forms live over here at the kind of rightmost menu item on the main menu. And when you first get your CRM, you will just have a single record form like this. it's worth just saying at this point, I often get asked, how do you delete record forms? Because there isn't an easy place to do that. And the answer to that, I just want to cover off at this point, is under Tools and Settings, just the same as any other form. You're going to come over to the Forms section. You're going to change over to the Records Forms here, and all your record forms are listed here, just like any other form. And you can go ahead and delete them from there. And so we've now got rid of that form. When I go back to my record form section, I now have no forms. So the first example I want to go through is looking at recording donations. And for those of you who've got the donations functionality in GoodCRM, you will probably know that we automatically record individual giving donations. But I quite often get asked about recording large donations, grants, and that kind of thing. So let's go ahead and create a form to record that type of information. So I'm going to click Add Form. I'm going to give this a name. So I'm going to call this Large Donations. And there we've got our form. We now need to add some fields to it. So remember, my top tip number one is to use the name field. So if I go to my Add Field button here, I've got a field that is always available for record forms, which is the name field. And in this case, I'm going to use this as, instead of you leaving it as name, I'm going to call this summary. And I'm going to explain why we want to use this field in a moment. So we're going to call this field summary, and it's going to just be a brief explanation of what this donation is, so that we can see that really clearly. And I'll show you in a moment why it's important to use that name field for this purpose. But before I do that, I'm going to add a few more fields to our form here. So I think that we will probably, sometimes these donations will come from a person. So I've got a person connection field here as well. I might just change that to donor. And I might decide that for our form, I'm only going to allow one person to be connected. And sometimes these donations might come from organizations as well. So let's go ahead and add a new connection field, which is going to be called organization. And that is going to link out to organizations in our system. And in general, I'm going to allow multiple organizations to be connected via this form, via this field, sorry. So I'm going to tick that, allow multiple values. Okay, we now have our new organization field. I'm actually going to call that donor organization just to make it really clear when we're filling this form in. Of course, all the typing skills go out of the window when I'm sharing my screen. And I am going to say that in this instance, on this one form, I am just going to allow one organization to be linked. Okay, what else do we need to record about our donation? Well, we probably need to know the value of our donation. So let's go and add a field for that. And I'm going to use a short text field for this. And I'm going to call it value. The reason I'm going to call it value rather than amount is because we're going to record gift in kind donations as well as cash donations here. So we want to put a value in of our gift in kind. So I'm going to go ahead and add that field. And I'm going to make this a required field. And I'm just going to go ahead and just add a little pound sign on here. So it's obvious what kind of information we want to get in there. Maybe we want just another field as a description about our donation as well. So we can just add a bit of descriptive text, particularly useful for those kind of gifting kind donations. So I'm going to use a long text field for this. And I'm just going to call it description. Okay, and I might just change the order of a few of these fields. I think maybe description wants to go maybe just above the value there. Okay, so we've now just built a brand new form. So if we go back to our record form section, there it is, our large donations form. If I click to add a response, then we can see the fields that we've got here. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to add in an example. So I will say that this is a cash donation of £100, let's say. Let's make it 1,000. I'm feeling generous today.
I was going to say, Tom, £100 isn't a large donation.
A large donation, that's fair stuff. I thought you might say it's something exactly like that. And I'm going to say that I'm the donor, and I'm just going to put a cash donation or something in the description. And And so we need to put the value in. So I'm going to put 1,000 in there. And I will go ahead and save this. So when we have a record like this, and I've connected it to a person through our person field here, and that is linking to my profile. If I click onto my profile at this point, under my connections section on the right-hand side, I can see that there is a connection to a large donation, and we can see there that this says cash donation of £1,000. That is coming from that name field that we've called summary on that form, but it's the name field in GoodCRM, and this is why we suggest top tip number 1, always use the name field, because whenever we are viewing connections on people's profiles or organization profiles, that kind of thing, we're going to use the name if it appears there. Otherwise, we're just going to use the name of the form, which doesn't really tell us much useful. So that is top tip number 1. And I will just going to share my entire screen so I don't have to keep switching between things. Let's get back into our presentation here. Top tip number 1, use the name field in your record form. So what have we learned? We can rename that name field to suit the purposes. So we call that summary in our form. It's often useful for a summary or something that is going to be descriptive so that we can understand when we're looking at a person's profile or an organization's profile that's connected to one of these records, what that context is. The contents of this field are displayed on those profiles when we see them. Okay, so that is the name field with our record forms. Top tip number 2 is to use validation and use numeric validation whenever we're storing numbers or currency. So we've recorded in our donation form there the value of donations. And what I'm saying is on the form, we want to say that this is a number. And there are a couple of reasons that we're going to do that. So let me quickly switch back to my browser and I'll show you why. So if we go into our large donations form now, if I go to our statistics page, I don't get any particularly useful information. We only have a few fields in this form. Now, it might be useful as we start recording these donations to see some totals and averages in this report here. So in order to do that, we need to apply this numeric validation. So I'm coming back to my form editor here, and I'm going to go down to the value field, and we have a field validation drop down here, which has 2 options, email address or number, and I'm going to choose the number validation or numeric validation. So all this is doing is it's saying that when we fill this form in, we expect the value in this field to be a number. And that does 2 things. First of all, if I now add a new response, so let's go ahead and add another donation here, donation from Steph. And Steph isn't going to be in here, so I just remembered we're not in my usual system, so it's going to be from Arthur. Okay, and we're going to put this down as a £2,000 donation. Now, if I start typing something in here where maybe I put the pound sign in and I go kind of 2,000 like that, I'm going to get an error message because this isn't a number. A pound sign isn't a number. So what we're doing here is we're making it so that we have to put a valid number into this field. So this does 2 things. First of all, it means that we know we're only going to get numerical data, and numerical data can be added up and averaged. And also, if I go ahead and save this now, when we look at our statistics page, because we've told the system that this is a numerical field, it's going to give us that total and average information. So we have had a total of £3,000 worth of donations across 2 results, which gives us an average of £1,500 per donation. Okay, so that is top tip number 2, use numeric validation for numbers and currency. It's worth saying as well, it's another reason why it's useful to have that little pound sign in brackets next to that field so that it's really clear and stops people putting the pound sign in and running into trouble. So numeric validation ensures that only numerical data can be entered into the system. It shows totals and averages. in the statistics view, and validations are added into the form. So we went in to edit the form and added validation there, not on the custom field. If that field is used in lots of different forms, then as long as there is a numeric validation on one of those fields, the system will try and give you totals and averages and statistics. Okay, which brings us on to top tip number 3, and that is using tag fields for statuses and classifications within your record forms. And so we've been recording these donations, and one thing that I mentioned is that some of these donations might be gift in kind donations, some of them might be cash donations. At the moment, we haven't got a way to distinguish between those, except for maybe putting that into the notes. Also, we might have received some of these donations and other ones might just have been pledged. So maybe we want to both say, what type of donation is this? Is it a gift in kind or cash donation? And also, has it just been pledged or have we actually received it? And I'm going to suggest that we use tag fields for these statuses and classifications, and I'll show you why. So let's go ahead and add some classifications. Now, as you will remember from your training, or if you're familiar with using the system, there are 2 steps to adding tag fields to the system. We need to add the tag type, and then we need to add a custom field to use that tag type. So I'm going to head over to my tools and settings. And I'm going to go over to my tags, and I'm going to add a couple of new tag types to the system. So I'm going to add one called donation types. And I'm going to add a couple of different types here. So I'm just going to use cash and gift in kind. And now I'm going to do the same, but for our status of our donations. So I'm going to add a new tag type, and I'll call this one donation statuses. And I'm just going to add 2 options for now. Obviously, with all these examples, you can always expand the options and classify things as you wish. I'm just going to use, I'm not going to say pledge, actually, I'm going to say pledged and received. So those are our 2 donation statuses. So now if I go back to my donation form, go back to edit the form, I can now add 2 new tag fields. So I'm going to add a new field, and I'm going to choose the tags option. And the first one I'll call donation type. And I choose my donation types as my options there. And I'm not going to allow multiple values. I'm going to say it has to be one or the other here. And then I'm going to go ahead and add a donation status field as well. Okay, and I'm going to use those donation statuses that we set up. And I'm just going to make a few fields required here. I think summary we should always have. Donor could be a donor or an organization, so we'll leave those as options. Maybe we always want a description and a value, and maybe we also always want a type and a status as well. Okay, so now if I go back to my responses, let's go ahead and edit the 2 that we've created and fill in those additional details. So I'm going to choose the donation type here as cash, and I'm going to choose the donation status as pledged, for example. And let's do that with the other one as well. So we're going to have, again, a cash donation here. We'll say this one's been received. Okay, now, what I've achieved there is fairly simple. I've just classified these things, and quite often people would tend to use a drop-down field for this, or a checklist or something like that, or a radio list, and those are all perfectly good options. The benefit of using tags is that tags automatically become filterable. So as you can see along the top here, we can filter by any tag fields or connection fields we have. So we've got our person, our donor, our organization that we could filter by. We can also filter by donation type and donation status. So if I just want to look at the cash donations, I can go ahead and filter them. or if I wanted to see gift in kind ones, I could filter there as well. We don't have gift in kind. Let's do via donation status instead. So if we look at received donations, we can search in that way. Now, statistics can also be filtered, and I'm going to flip over to another system here where I've got, this is what I call my Blue Peter system. So here's one I created earlier, and here I've got various donations in here. Some of them are pledged, some of them are received, some of them are gift in kind, some of them are cash. And if we go to our statistics page here, we can see that across, let me just reset that, spoilers everybody, across all of our donations, whether they are gift in kind or they are cash donations, we have got a total value of £36,500. Now, if we just wanted to know what the value of our gift in kind donations were, we could go ahead and filter this by gift in kind, and then our stats update accordingly. If we only want to know gift in kind that's been pledged as opposed to received, then we can further narrow this down. Maybe we're just interested in all of our received cash donations, in which case we can do another little search there. And actually, we haven't received any cash donations, but maybe we've got some pledged. There we have various cash donations pledged. So that's top tip number 3. Well done, Steph. You're keeping up even if I'm not. That is to use those tag fields for statuses and classifications in our record fields, in our record forms, I should say, when it's going to be useful to have that ability to filter. Those tags can also be brought into our segmentation tools. So, you know, those statistics that we're looking at there, there's one place we can filter these, but also our segments tool can make use of those filters as well. So tags can be very useful for that kind of instant filtering. Okay, so tags can be used to store statuses and classifications. Using tags helps us to easily filter responses. And tags can also be used to filter statistics as well as the responses themselves. And examples of this would be, as we've just seen, gift in kind versus cash, statuses, pledged versus received, and that kind of thing. Okay, so Patty's just said, I'm assuming you'll need to have people and organizations saved in the system before you add them to record forms to create the connections. Yes, absolutely, Patty, you will. You can create those, you can create new connections for people and organizations when you're filling the form in as well. And what I will do is I will show you how that works in another example. Do pop up in the chat if I've forgotten to do that, but I am going to look at an example in a minute where we're going to start off by just getting some information from people, and then we're going to link them separately. So we'll have a look at that together. Okay, wonderful. So just a little recap then of what we've learned looking at our donations form. We can record large donations in a record form. Obviously, we can record lots of different things in the record forms. Those donations can be linked to people and organizations. And I'm going to show you in our system, in the Blue Peter system, some of these examples in a moment. We can use that name field for clarity when we're viewing those connections on profiles, and we can use tag fields to classify and filter our data and statistics. Okay, so let me just flip back and show you some examples here. So in this system, I've added various different responses. And once we've got these responses in the system, we can filter through them. So we can see here that we've had a pledge of £20,000 from Weasley's Wizard Wheezes. And the person here the donor was George Weasley. The value is £20,000. The organization was Weasley's Wizard Wheezes. We've got a little description there. And this is a cash donation with a status of pledged. And we can go through and see we've got similar ones. So we've got a gift in kind donation here from the Ministry of Magic to use some of their space for performances. We have got a equipment hire gift in kind donation from Fred Weasley. we've got a £10,000 donation from me, which is unrestricted funding for a particular, which has been donated for use in a particular campaign, but in a otherwise unrestricted way. Just realised that those things don't necessarily marry up. And that's a cash donation that's been pledged. And then we have another donation here from Hogwarts. Again, it's a gift in kind donation. So if we start looking at some of these organisations now, so let's have a look at Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, for example. Under our large donations here, we can see that we've got the equipment hire donation, and we've got a pledge here as well. So we can see how those things are linked. We're going to come back a little bit later. We're going to circle round and we're going to look at how we can use all of this data to segment people and create badges based on whether people have made these donations and things like that as well. Okay, so I can see there was a question there. Let me just.
So Izzy was just asking about the numbers, whether this is because she's not using the validation for numeric values.
Yeah, quite possibly. So if the statistics are showing totals and averages, Izzy, then it's likely that there is a restriction on at least one of your forms, but it is potentially the case that some of those fields don't, or some of the forms use the same field but don't have the validation on, which might mean there is some odd data in there that isn't being passed as numbers correctly. What I'd say is maybe do a bit of testing with some kind of clean forms that create a new field that's only being used in those forms and just test things out. If you think there is an issue, there could well be some kind of bug, do drop us a line via the help section, and we'll see if there's anything we can help with that to investigate. Okay, you're very welcome. Okay then, so we're going to have a look at some other examples now. Let me go back to our slide here, and we're looking at Tom's top tip number 4. And this is going to be using different forms to deal with the same record. And when we talk about records, we use the term record and response interchangeably. So when you're in the record section, you'll see that we have responses listed, and you can add a response. We call those responses records, just to confuse you. So when I'm talking about dealing with the same record here, I actually mean dealing with the same response. Again, I think I need to show you this for you to understand what I'm wittering on about. So let's go and have a look at yet another example. Okay, so I'm going to come back to my record forms here. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the example of kind of an open call where we're maybe asking artists to give us proposals for an open submission, an open call, and we want them to send us a form in to apply and give us their ideas. And then we're going to assess which of those we want to move forward. So we've kind of got 2 parts of a process that we want to manage with these forms. So the first thing we need to do is we need to create a form that an artist can fill in with their proposal. So I'm going to go ahead and set one of those up. So I'm going to create a new form here. I'm going to call this open call submission. And I'm going to go ahead and add some fields into here. So I'm going to, I'll go ahead and use the name field, the magic field that we should always use. And I'm going to call this proposal overview. Okay. And yes, I am going to call it proposal overview. It might be slightly differently named in our Blue Peter version, but that's fine. Okay, I'm going to make that a required field. I also want some information about the artist. So I'm going to add some basic fields in to collect those data. So I'm going to add a field here, just a short text field called full name. And I'm going to create a field called email address. And I'm going to add some validation onto our email address field to say this needs to be an email address. And I'm going to make these fields required as well. What else do we need? I think we need some information about what they're proposing. So let's go ahead and add a long text field. In fact, we've got this description field. Could we use that? Yes, we could. I always like to reuse fields when we can. And I'm just going to rename this to artist proposal. No, I'm going to call it your proposal. Getting ahead of myself. Okay, I'm going to make that a required field as well. Finally, I'm going to give the artists a way to upload some supporting documents, images, documents, that kind of thing. So I'm going to add a file field here. There is an images field. If you just wanted people to upload images, you can upload images onto file fields as well. So it makes it a bit more multi-purpose. So I'm going to call this supporting documents. And I'm going to allow people to upload more than one, multiple values there. So multiple documents that they can upload. I'm not going to make that a required field, but I am going to put a limit on it. I'm going to say they can only upload up to 4 documents there. Okay, I'm just going to add a few things to make this a bit more friendly because it's a public-facing form. So I'm going to add an element here. I'm going to add a heading, which is going to be open call submission. I'm going to also add, I'm going to move these around in a minute because they're not going to make sense quite yet. I'm going to add some instructions above our submission title as well, just saying, please give your proposal a descriptive title. Let's move these around. So I'm going to click on the reorder fields. I'm going to move our heading up to the top. I'm going to put our instructions just above the proposal overview field there. And maybe I'm just going to add one more set of instructions just above the proposal section as well. So please tell us more about your proposal. And I can just kind of grab this and move it as well. There we go. Wonderful. So I think that's a fairly friendly public-facing form now. So now what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to share that form so that people can fill it in. So let me go ahead and set up sharing. And I'm going to say that I want to be notified when we get one of these responses in, one of these submissions in. And then I get my link that I can then share with the artist. And when one of those artists fills in one of these forms, then we will see the response in this form. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do something a little bit tricky. So once people have filled that form in, as an organization, we're going to assess these proposals and we want to add some more information. So we're going to add things like our comments, we're going to add an assessment outcome. Now, we don't want to add those fields to this form because otherwise the artists are going to see those fields and they might say that they might accept their own proposal. We could do a thing where we add those fields later down the line, so we get all the proposals in and then we stop sharing the form and then we add more fields to it. But that's going to be, it means that we can't start assessing these proposals until after the closing date. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this form. So I'm going to use the little copy button here, and I'm now going to call this open call assessment. There we go, that's fine. And because it's an assessment, it's going to be used internally. We don't need all of the bells and whistles, all of the headings and instructions, because we know what we're doing, or that's the idea at least. So I'm just going to get rid of the instruction fields here and the heading. I'm also going to just change some of the field names here. So I'm going to change this, instead of full name, I'm going to put artist full name so that it's really obvious who we're talking about. And I'm going to say artist email address as well. And instead of your proposal, I'm going to change this to artist proposal. Just so that this form is now internal facing. It's what we would expect to see, not what the artist would expect to see. And now I'm going to add a few additional fields. So I'm going to go ahead and add a comments field, and we've got one of those already, so we'll use that. And I'll just change this to say assessor comments. And we also need a tag field. I want to put a tag field on here to say what the status of this assessment has been, what the outcome's been. So I'm just going to go and check it in our tags to see if we have a relevant status field, and we don't. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new one. I'm going to call this open call statuses, submission statuses. We'll make it a bit more general so we can use it in the future as well for other things. And I'm just going to add a few options in here, such as shortlisted and maybe approved, if that's the right word. And maybe what's a nicer word than rejected? Let's say declined. So we now have some statuses that, as an assessor, we can use to classify these when we assess them. Okay, so let's now move over to our one we created earlier system, because in this system, in our open call application form, we've had a number of responses come through. And so we can read through these responses, and we can see that Arthur Weasley here wants to do an exhibition of Muggle artifacts. And so he's got a proposal there of how that can work, and he's attached a PDF with his artifacts in there. What else have we got? We've got one from, we've got one from Hermione Granger, who wants to do a history of Hogwarts VR experience. And Hermione's put quite a long proposal together, which is quite like her. And then what else have we got? We've got Harry Potter wanting to form a club to teach defensive spells, counter curses, and jinxes. Okay, so we've had a few of these in. Now we want to start assessing them. So this is coming back to the tip. This is tip number 4. What we can do is we can move these responses between forms. And the way we do that, let's go ahead and look at Hermione's submission here. So we're going to go and edit Hermione's submission. And just like you can with when you're editing a person or any other information in the system, you've got the use an alternative form swapper over on the right-hand side. So what we can do is, instead of using the open call application form, which is what we're using at the moment, we want to switch over to the open call assessment form. And here we go, we can see exactly the same submission, but this time we are viewing it in this open call assessment form instead, and we can go ahead and add some assessor comments, so very strong application. And maybe we're going to go ahead and accept this application. So we've got awarded instead of accepted in the system, but there we go. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. Oops, I need to connect this to a person. Very good point, form. And this goes back to the question we had earlier. So when we have these shared forms, we don't create people when people fill them in. We don't create people's profiles in the system. And that's because if we did, every time one got filled in, we would create a new person, and we'd get lots of duplicates if that person's filling them in several times. And there are ways to do this automatically in the system using workflows, but again, we're just looking at what you can do out of the box here. So what we're going to do in this case is we're going to say, okay, do we have Hermione Granger in the system? And in this case, we do. Now, we might want to go and check Hermione's profile to make sure that the email matches and things like that, so that we know this is definitely the same one. I'm confident it is. Just to answer the question as well about what happens if the person doesn't already exist in the system, do they have to exist? You'll see we have the plus button here. This will actually allow us to create a new person, and that person will then be added to our form. So we don't have to go out of the system to another place to do that. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to go and link this up to Hermione.
We've just had another question. I don't know if you want to answer it now.
Yeah, can you tell me what it is, Steph?
Yeah, so do people filling in the forms have to sign up by, say, adding an email and a password, or do they just complete the form with the fields that have been created here?
Great question. So when we share one of these forms, it's a very simple form. It works a bit like a Google form, so there aren't kind of accounts that people have to set up in order to fill them in. They don't have to log in or create an account. However, sometimes it's desirable that people log in. So it might be that this is somebody who is going to be working with you over a duration, or maybe they're signed up to a series of workshops, that kind of thing. And so that's where we can create portals and workflows in the system that will allow people to create a login and manage any of their forms and things from there on in. And therefore, we've got more of a relationship with them. That is possible, but that is then in that bespoke setup territory. So in terms of just what we're looking at today, out of the box record forms, no, people don't have to sign up, and it's not going to create people in the system. You're linking this manually to someone in the system, as we've just done with Hermione. So hopefully that answers the question. And what we'll see now as well, by the way, is that we're now back in our open call application form, and Hermione's response has disappeared. And that's because we use the open call assessment form to update Hermione's submission. And so therefore it's been moved at the point we saved it, it's been moved to this other form. So there are a few things that we can pick up from what we've just done. First of all, we can create different steps in a process, and that can start with somebody filling in one of these forms themselves, or it can just be used internally. Each of those steps, we can add different attributes that are relevant at that step. So it wasn't relevant when Hermione was filling in her application form to say what the assessor comments were. That wasn't part of the step at that point. But when the assessor comes in, that's a new step. We can then add those fields that allow us to add those assessment things. But also, we're moving these responses between forms when we change the form and then we save. So as well as getting those additional fields, we're moving things around. So you can imagine that each form can be part of a process. Each one can be a different step of the process. And that means you can see how many things are at the proposal stage, how many things are at the assessment stage, and then potentially they could be moved on to these are the ones that are approved, and you've got them, all of those in one place. So using top tip number 4 is you can use multiple forms, multiple record forms to edit the same response or the same record, and you can therefore move them through a process. So that's top tip number 4. Use different forms to edit the same response. Responses can be passed through forms like steps in a process. Each step can allow different attributes to be edited. Particularly useful for adding information to a response which has been submitted by an external stakeholder, as with the example that we just looked at. And examples of usage for this would be open call submissions. It could be grant applications. So I know that some of our organizations that we work with award grants. It might be that they're a CPP, or it might be that they're a foundation. So people can actually apply for grants through this kind of system as well. Again, it's the kind of thing that a more bespoke workflow might be better for, but you can certainly get a long way with this kind of out-of-the-box system. And then we're going to get straight into a kind of a Q&A section. So Tom's badge bonus, we're going to look at using these connection fields, and we're going to use those in combination with segments and badges. Okay, so let's go back up to the system. And what we're going to do is we're going to come back to our previous system where we've got our large donations. And we're going to use the segments tool. So I'm going to go to tools and settings and to segments. And I'm going to add a new segment. So what I want to do here is I want to find all the people who have given us cash or gift in kind donations. And maybe I want to find all the organizations that have given us gift in kind or cash donations as well. So to do that, first of all, I need to find all of the records that are to do with those different types of donation. So I'm going to say large donations, cash, and in this case, we're going to be looking for records because they're in our record forms. And I'm just going to go and add some criteria here. And I'm just going to say where donation type has any of cash. So we're using, again, that tag field that we set up. So this gives us a list of all of our donations that are in cash. And then we can set up a similar segment for gift in kind donations. So let's do large donations, gift in kind. Again, we're going to use records here. And we're going to add some criteria where donation type has any of gift in kind. And that's going to give us a list of all our gift in kind. Oh, oops, no, it's not. Let me go ahead and make sure that's saved. Okay, there we go. Sorry. We then get a list of all our gift in kind donations. There aren't any gift in kind donations in this particular system. So let's stick with the large donations cash. If we want to understand who has made these donations, we need another segment. So let's create a large cash donors segment. So large donors cash. In this case, we're going to look for people. And this is where it gets a bit tricky because we want to refer from one segment to the other. So people are connected to records through the person connection field. So we've got this records person connection field here. So searching for people who are connected to records, and we're going to reference an existing segment, and we're going to use the large donations cash option there. So what we're saying is find all the people that were donors in our large donation records. So this is how these connection fields can link together. And then when we look at that, we can see there are 2 people who've made donations. And if we've got our pro account, we can go ahead and create a little badge for these people. So let's give our badge a color, and let's find this is cash, so let's find a pound sign in here. And let's put some other colors in here as well. And we'll just call these large donors or large donor. Either way. And I can save the badge there. And so now anyone that appears in our list of large donors here, if we look at their profile, we'll see they have the large donors badge. And if we come back to our Blue Peter system, we come over to our segments here, you'll see that I've set up segments for large donor organizations cash, large donor organizations gift in kind, and large donors cash and large donors gift in kind. And they all have their different badges. So if we start looking at some of our organizations now, maybe we'll have a look at the Weasley's Wizard Wheezes here. We can see that they are both large donors for gift in kind and cash. And we can click on these to link back through to the results of that segment as well. So that is just a little bonus bit at the end to show you how, once we've got all of this connectivity in our record forms, but also anywhere else in the system, we can bring those into segments, and within our pro accounts, we can show membership of segments on people's or organizations' profiles as well. So I'm just going to round off that screen before we come back to our questions and answers section. So connection segments and badges. The connection fields allow you to find connected data through our segments. Badges provide a visual indication of belonging to a segment, and badges are a pro feature and work for people and organization segments. Okay, wonderful. That is the end of the me telling you how it works section. We've had some great questions along the way. Now is your chance to ask any other questions about what we've just looked at, about record forms, about connections, about segments, about badges, and if nothing around those things, any other questions you might have. We're also really interested to know things like what would be useful for you in future webinars, and whether this was useful to you, and that kind of thing. So give us all of your comments, give us all of your questions. And now is that chance. And Steph, can you keep an eye on the questions and feed them through to me when you're ready?
Yeah. So Jess has asked, really interested in the use of forms for open calls. Is there a way of copying the completed form? A copy of the completed form can be sent to the artist by email. So basically, like, they fill in the form and then they get like a PDF of what they've submitted, for example?
Yeah, sure. So great question, Jess. And I think that the answer is not from our record forms. And something maybe I do this too much, but I try to demo things that are purely doable out of the box, so to speak, because there's no additional cost involved in that kind of thing. And with the out of the box record forms, no, you get a notification to say there's been a record, but you don't have a way to automatically email an artist with a confirmation or bring the content in. What you can do, as with any data in GoodCRM, you can export those all of those submissions into a spreadsheet. You can use that to fire up a mail merge in Word or any other document software, or an email or email software, however you want, and use all of that data to send out a mail merge, but it would be a manual process. And then the expensive answer is that through our customization of the system on your behalf, through workflows, portals, that kind of thing, then absolutely we can build these processes so that somebody registers with the system and then they fill in their submission, and then it emails them a copy of that and it emails you a copy of that. And then when you go through that approval process, they automatically get an email saying, congratulations, we want to move forward with your proposal and please fill in this form for more information. Or, unfortunately, this wasn't right for us, but do try again in the future. So all of those things can be automated, but that is subject to us running a workshop with you, going through that process and then building functionality into the system for you. And it is done with kind of pre-existing functionality into the system workflow, so it's not as expensive as completely bespoke software, but there is a cost attached. So just want to be really clear about that.
Yeah, I think with quite a lot of questions of is this possible, there's always going to be, like answer one will be either the system does that thing or it doesn't right now. And then answer two is can we build it or not, if it doesn't already do that.
No, that's right, Stefan. And that building fits into two categories. So what I've just described in workflows is quite easy for us to build because it's us configuring the existing system. And then you might turn around to us and say, well, can you integrate with Word so that this automatically generates a mail merge and posts these letters out to people? And then we'd say that's much more involved. That's custom development, which costs more and takes longer. But you've kind of got those three categories out of the box. You've got the workflows and things that can be done quite affordably, and then you've got bespoke configuration and development, which costs a lot of money.
Cool. Sorry, there's just some interesting sharing in the chat going on. I don't know if that has answered the question around whether does the person see a thank you page confirming their submission, but it does.
Yes, you just get a quick thank you. We've received your response. One thing to be careful of if you are going to start sending record forms out, make sure your email settings are all complete, because otherwise when it tries to send you an email at the end of that process, it might create an error message. So there should now be, if anyone hasn't set up their email settings, as soon as you log into GoodCRM now, it's on the dashboard saying there is an issue. Do look out for that and do make sure you update your email settings if you see that issue.
Another question we've had from Helena is, would she use segments to analyze different methods of cash donations like contactless, cash, text, website? So if there's lots of donations coming in, maybe from on-site, at a venue, maybe online, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. So the analysis is kind of as good as the data that you capture. So if you're able to capture the different ways in which those donations have come in, then you can certainly view statistics around that. There is an interesting dichotomy, which is that I've been talking, one of my top tips today has been to use tag fields. One of the benefits of using other types of field, like a drop-down list, is that you do get a breakdown from that list of the percentages for each option chosen in different responses. So there are always different options to serve different needs. Tags are great because they're easy to filter, and you can therefore derive those statistics through the segments that way. But if you want it laid out for you, then sometimes those kind of anything that's got the word list in it, so checklist and radio list and multi-select list and drop-down list, are all going to be really useful to give you percentage breakdowns of how people have interacted in different ways.
Cool. Jess has asked, can you close a form so it doesn't receive submissions after a certain date? So if a link for filling in a form has been shared quite widely, can you basically make it so, oh, right, you're going to show, great.
Yes, you can. And so you can't set kind of a date to do this so it does it automatically. But what you can do is you can come over to your sharing section. So we're currently sharing this form here. You can just click stop sharing. And from that point on, people won't be able to fill that form in anymore.
What would happen if they did click on a link that had been shared, just out of interest?
Good question, Steph. I don't know the answer.
Interesting. I wonder if they'll just get an error message saying that this.
Yeah, they will get a message of some sort. But I'm gonna have a look at that later and see what happens and make sure it looks pretty. Yes, good question.
Anyone got any other questions? Feel free to unmute and ask them in person if you have. No. Oh, yeah, we do. Catherine asks, oh, you'd be interested in a future workshop around segments, more in depth, especially around events and participants. Perfect. That's great.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think that I was just thinking, answering Helena's question, that that might be a really good topic for a future one. So, and there's lots that we can get our teeth into there as well. So, yeah, I'd be very happy to do that in the future.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, like we said, the system's so flexible, and the same functionality in a way can be used for lots of different things. And I think it's really good to be looking at examples like this and working through things together, and also answering your questions, because it feeds more of what we can do on our side by making things, you know, better suited to those solutions, if that seems like it's a thing that people are using for a particular purpose quite a lot. So it's having feedback's really, really useful.
Yeah, and I think, you know, part of the reason for putting this webinar series together is exactly that, because we can't cover everything in huge detail in the training, because otherwise, you know, we'd need 5 training sessions instead of 2, and most people wouldn't finish them all. And so by having these masterclasses, and certainly by having your suggestions on what's going to be most useful, will hopefully help to not only help you all here today and those people who will be receiving the video later, but also we'll start to build up an archive of these for people to do those deep dives in for the things that are interesting to them as well.
Sorry, can you just show again, just one more time, how to delete a form?
Yes, absolutely. Let me go through that now. Okay, so if I come to my record forms section, and I won't be a vandal, I'll create a new form here called delete me. And just for good measure, I'll put some fields on it. There we go. One field will do. Okay, and now when we go to our record forms section, we can see now we've got this delete me form. Actually, something else that I meant to mention earlier, when we were talking about those different steps that we can take things through in processes as well, is that sometimes if we've got a 2-stage process here, we've got the open call application form and then the open call assessment form, maybe we have 2 or 3 of those, you can always filter these forms. So if you just want to search for the word open, you're only going to see those forms that are relevant. So just a useful tip, people don't often see that there. But nonetheless, we still end up with forms like this that we don't want. So as with any form in the system, all forms, if it's your people forms, organization forms, event forms, can all be edited under tools and settings and then forms. And it's just the same for record forms. And when we're in this section, we see people forms by default. but we can always change this. So if we want to look at forms to do with organizations, we can switch to them there. And indeed, records are listed as a different type of form here. So when we come through to the record section of the forms, we can see all our forms listed, and we can go ahead and delete forms from here.
Great.
Okay, so hopefully that has answered your question and answered one that you didn't ask.
Izzy's asked, with forms, if we wanted to be able to export responses, would that be a custom build or workflow solution?
No,
you can only see that you can export from statistics as standard, but is there any other standard?
Let me show you, because this came up from a client asked me a question yesterday about this, so it's obviously something that people aren't sure about. So let me go ahead and demo this too. So we've got our large donations form here, which has got 5 donations in. Let's export those. So we can come to our tools and settings. We can come to our segments tool. And I'm just going to add a segment here called large donations. Oops. And I'm going to choose records again as the type of information I'm looking to get in this segment. When we add our criteria here, because this is a record, if we start searching for record form, it is an option to filter by. And in fact, if I clear that and scroll right down to the bottom of the list, you'll see that it's down at the bottom of the list here. So what we're saying here is search for records where the record form has any of, and so we can search across multiple forms at once. But I'm just going to go and search in that large donations form. So we've got a record form called large donations. It's got our 5 donations in it. And what we're saying here is find all of the records within that form. Find those 5 records. And when we look at our results, we will then get our list of donations. And then we can click on export. Okay, hopefully that's answered that question. So I think that we're kind of coming to the end of the session. It's been lots of fun for me. I really, truly hope it's been useful for everybody here. We might well get a little survey out to you all just to get some feedback on today's session, given it was our first. So do look out for that. It would be great to get your input. Thanks for some brilliant suggestions already on what we can do in the future. We will take those into consideration. We will ask that question in our survey as well to get more ideas from you. We haven't worked out how often we're going to do these yet, or whether the format's going to be the same, but we will certainly let you know. Do look out on the dashboard within GoodCRM. We will advertise them there first. We will send emails out nearer the time, but do keep an eye out for new webinars as they come. Steph, anything else you want to add?
No, just thanks for coming.
Brilliant. Okay, well, I think that went all right. I might do another one. Thanks ever so much, everyone, and I'll look forward to seeing you again in the future.